Good afternoon, everybody. We've got another Friday live session. I can't believe how quickly these Fridays fly by. As you know, if you've joined any of these previously, these sessions are all about showcasing brilliant work that's happening in the public sector. We want these sessions to be proactive and positive, as opposed to us just whinging about how bad everything is. And they seem to be going down well, and that's really the agenda. So we'll start off with a quick round robin of introductions, and then we'll get straight into it. Alex has done a brilliant job of producing this slide deck for us today and this presentation for us today, really about driving leadership and how we can proactively actually deliver leadership change and leadership development. So it's all that positive slant to this whole session. So I'll kick off. I'm Anthony Lawton, founder of Fit to Care and Insight Genie. My big thing is supporting, coaching, advising predominantly public sector organisations, and my big passion is improving the well-being of staff, largely through behavioural science, and AI is a big theme for me going forwards. So Andrew's next on my screen. I'll hand over to Andrew.
There we go. We're almost alphabetical now, aren't we? Yeah, I'm Andrew Davies. I'm a GP by background, and we've talked here before around the 5x5 model, and there were a lot of interesting questions about some of the basic management things, which made me think of Alex, who's later on the call, and love Alex to bits. Done lots of work with me in the past to provide leadership training, sort of in Warrington and Halton across health, social care, all that kind of stuff. So I know you're going to have a good time for this hour that we've got together.
Brilliant.
And then over to Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew Adam. I'm the founder of Systemic Solutions Consulting. I offer leadership and organizational development, support, training, consultation. And Andy and I have worked together for many, many years, where we've really consolidated our thinking together to help create meaningful change for teams and organizations. And I've met Alex through Andy. So Andy's the golden link at the moment, as well as you, Anthony.
Lots of connections and synergies. So brilliant. We're on target. Alex, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anthony. And thanks for the kind words. Andy, we love you too. Lovely to meet you. Well, I'm Alex Robertson. I'm one of the managing partners here at Consortium 24 or C24. What do? We implement programs of change. Myself, Julie, my colleague, and Tracy, my other managing partner colleague, lead programs of change predominantly in the public sector, but my background's been in this sector for about 12 years. Most recently, I was program director for Andy's frailty program across Warrington. And then before that, before I saw the light and came over to the NHS and social care side, I worked for about 20 years in the commercial world, particularly in financial services, utilities, and media, again, doing change management and delivery. So that's me. So without further ado, if we can...
Alex, just whilst you're bringing those slides up, what I didn't say in my first intro is we really encourage people on LinkedIn that are live with us to put your comments and engage with us on this journey. Put your questions in, put your statements in, and we will pick them up either through the presentation if Alex feels it's appropriate, or we'll pick them up at the end.
Brilliant. Thank you. So drum roll, please, see if the screen share works.
I'm just going to click OK.
Super. There we go. So, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work in implementing programs of change at C24. And in essence, what we're finding more and more is that our clients find that the way that we work in leadership and implementing change has real resonance for their teams. And that's really become the genesis of our leadership programs. We're not trainers by trade. We are people who do implementation into teams and to support teams to deliver brilliant change through using some of the tools and techniques that we're going to cover today here. And that has turned into, in essence, a second tranche of our business, whereby we run leadership programs for teams, but very much from a position of providing simple, practical tools that we've used for a number of years, which we know work, that can actually really help them deliver significant benefits. And today, what we'd like to do is bring a taster of some of these to life. Both the content, and the content, we make no apology for, is simple. We don't pretend that this is anything brand new. A lot of it isn't, but it's actually the way in which we work with teams that our feedback tells us really resonates and helps people create habits that actually stick. So that's what we'd like to do today. And as Anthony said as well, please do pop questions into the screen, and we'll pick them up as we go. And if they're coming up, I'll hang on until the end. So, practical inspiration and leadership. I was really wondering how to kick off this session until I was reading a blog from somebody of you. I'm sure you'll know Roy Lilly. He does the NHS Managers Net blog, and it was on, of all things, yesterday, leadership. And he said, and it was pinged from the Corporate Leadership Council. He said, out of a team of 100, 11 people are generally enthusiasts. There's 13 people who will be in free fall with no real commitment. And as we know, they often take up a lot of managerial and leadership time. But in actual fact, in the middle, we've then got 76% who are floating. They take their steer from a manager or a leader they really respect, or they've got a real interest in a key area. But the massive P word, potential, is there. And it's interesting because quite often, as we said in the introductory text, quite often managers are accidental. Research tells us that 66%, 2/3, have received no formal training, and yet the power's in their hands to unlock the potential of these 76 people. And then the question is, to what degree could a small change in the blue to the green make a difference in outcomes for your organization? And this very much applies to both the commercial background we have, but also very much to the public sector and the work we do in the NHS and social care, which is where we have a real passion. So, as we say, what difference would a 1 or 2 percentage point shift to the green make to your organization outcomes? Well, the good news we think there are elements here that can really do that are practical, that are accessible, and that are proven to work, that are easy, don't cost a fortune, and make a difference, which is kind of what we're about. So we'd like to give you an introduction to that today. So to give you a flavor, the nature of the work that we do in leadership programs is absolutely tailored to our organizations that we work with. But to be really, really clear, the same things come up and again, time and time again. And at the start of it is, to use a quote from a brilliant book, my why. What's my purpose? Why am I here? What is my reason for being? And critically, what outcomes am I here to contribute towards? So that tends to form the core of what we do. So there's a couple of modules on that which are really quite I guess focused on the person, focused on the way in which they are, the way in which they think, and their motives and behaviors. And that's the reason, to be honest, why I shifted sectors about 12 years ago, because my purpose for me, I'd made a real difference and I'd had a really great career, and I think I'd hopefully made a difference to the people I work with and for in the commercial world. But I had an opportunity to do some work in the NHS, and I was hooked from the first day because I found myself lacking a purpose. And I can now see the purpose working with amazing clinicians like Andy and Matthew and others to help them be even more brilliant with patients, gave me my purpose back. And that's why the purpose is the anchor of our leadership sessions. And we're going to touch on a little bit of that today. But then around it, we have things that you would expect to see, that if I'm honest, we would expect to see leaders and managers have by default. How to prioritize time and energy management really brilliantly. Communicating purposefully, that word purpose again, linking to outcomes. Effective project management. Of course, in the nature of the work that we do a lot of project management. And quite often, in actual fact, we're doing a piece of work with the Southern system at the moment, which is helping them re-examine how they run projects because they've become overly complicated. And actually, simple project program management that works is a key part of our answers from our clients. Working with others effectively, particularly coaching and feedback, some just core skills that really deliver. My preferences, there are many tools out there for this, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, Luminous Spark, Color Insights, DISC, etc. But helping people consider their preferences through a simple set of questions, and also how to interact effectively with others. And then finally, in an area we're going to touch on today, because I do like this bit, is data and the power of data. Because again, we often see this as either misused, abused, or not used at all. So to understand, create insight from, and then create purposeful, that word again, purpose, case for change from data. So what we thought we'd do is pick up elements from the middle, how I am as a leader, and also elements from the power of data. So let's start with an outcome. Now that word outcomes is interesting, because how many times I wonder have junior managers or new managers sat down and gone, yes, I'm going to nod about an outcome, but on the inside I'm thinking, flipping heck. What do we mean? What's an outcome? What's the difference between an outcome and an output? Well, here's a simple slide deck that we use in the training to bring it to life. And I make no apology for the simplicity of it. So let me tell you a story. Imagine that there are 3 people employed by a gardening company, and the first one is employed only to dig holes. That's his entire job. The second one's employed only to plant trees, and the third one is employed only to fill the hole in round the tree. So together, they plant a tree which grows and thrives and delivers fresh air and well-being and so forth. So there's a benefit of the tree. Now let me tell you a story about this particular garden company. Our reporting to our executive team told us this. Month 1, oh no, we're only 33% effective. It's amber, bad news. And we've had a really worrying rise in twisted ankles, broken legs, fractured neck of femurs. Let's pick any limb ailment of choice for our clinicians amongst us. So that's month 1. What are we going to do? Let's see how month 2 goes. Month 2, good news. 6%, 66% effective. We're green. It's reversed. We've got no reported twisted ankles or broken legs or fractured neck of femurs. So I know what I can write in my report to my managers and my execs. I can go, we've had 100% improvement. Yippee. Great. Outcome achieved. Or is it? Let's have a look at what happened in month 1. So month 1, we've got a really reliable worker in the person who digs the holes. He comes day in, day out, and he digs his holes. However, the challenge was in that month 1, the person planting the tree had a 4-week holiday in Australia, and the person who was filling the holes in had done his back in moving his wheelbarrow, so he was off sick. So therefore, we had lots of holes and lots of people falling down holes and breaking their legs and twisting their ankles. So then let's see what happened in month 2. You might be ahead of me here. The digging hole person was still there. Australia, the trip was delayed a bit longer than we thought, so he didn't come back. No trees, but the good news is the wheelbarrow man was back and he was filling his holes in, so we had a 66% success rate. But guess what we didn't have? Any trees. Within 60 seconds, we've created an analogy for what an outcome is, a purpose, the tree. And also, we've introduced and started to connect the concept of an outcome to how we use data. But we've not done a session that says, we're going to talk about data today with 900 slides, because everybody goes snore and falls asleep, because that's not what we're doing. But we're starting to introduce the power of data. And an analogy I really like, and I always like using this slide, this one, watermelons. Because what we saw on those previous slides was an example, a brilliant example of a watermelon, where things look really, really great on the outside. We've made 100% improvement. Andy, you must be happy with that as the exec director. As this of the CCG, must be over the moon with 100%. Couldn't get any better, right? Except when you look on the inside, it's red. Because the reality of the measure, the outcome that we should be measuring, is hidden by the green. How often do we measure things that actually are not connected to our purpose? And how often do we connect things or measure things that are not connected to our outcomes? So then we can start having a conversation about purposeful measures and purposeful outcome measures. And we do a couple of sessions on this particularly. And just a little aside on this one, particularly in the NHS. The NHS does like trying to show a direct causative effect between one intervention and one set of outcomes for people. It's much more complicated than that. So actually, a lot of the time we're showing correlative outcomes, contributing outcomes to improve better quality of life. But still, we're focusing on the things that move the dial. So what's an outcome? This isn't my quote. This is from a lady called Deborah Mills Schofield, a professor, and she wrote in the Harvard Business Review. Outcomes are the difference made by the outputs, the benefits that the work helps us to deliver. Because without the outcomes, the outputs themselves are merely digging a hole or filling a hole in. They don't deliver the benefits. We need the whole suite of information to deliver benefits. So we make no apologies for using simple analogies like that, because straight away, when we talk to the team about it, they go, oh, yeah, hang on a second. But I wonder to what degree is the work that I'm doing planting the tree? And they start to use the same tree-based language or watermelon language when they're talking to each other as a team. So we start to create a standardized way of understanding sometimes concepts which are overcomplicated in a really simple and efficient way that have imagery and that have power and that have presence. And we use that all the way through the programs that we use, and we use that all the way through the consultancy delivery that we do as well. So we've got our team starting to think about outcomes. And then we start thinking about, okay, well, what habits do I have? And how do I think? And to what degree do I think that the habits that I have can make a difference to the outcomes that I seek, the difference I want to make in my role, the tree that I want to plant? See if any of these resonate for you as habits. I certainly resonate with some of these. I get distracted when I've got too much on my plate. Andy just said before we joined, I've had a couple of really, really mad weeks. I'm not suggesting he gets distracted, but sometimes we have a huge amount on our plates. I like to get the easy jobs out of the way first. Yeah, I fall for that one sometimes. I never get everything done I want to do. I never complete my things to-do list. Really, really common, particularly in newer managers who feel that success is doing all of the tasks. Come across this time and time again in the mentoring work that we do. And then I'm just overwhelmed, particularly in this sector, but not exclusively. I have so much on, I just don't know where to start. So we start to work with our teams and go, okay, let's have a look at the reality of what you're doing. We introduce these concepts, and these are 4 from many different ones. Where shall I put my full attention? And my full attention is anchored in the difference I want to make, correlatively or causatively, doesn't matter. But it's a contribution to the outcomes I'm here to make. So that starts to flip away from I do all the tasks, I dig all the holes, to I'm going to do the ones that move the dial the most. Is this taking me away from what I want to achieve in my purpose? And then let's get the big items done. Covey's big rocks parable is a well-used one, but actually let's get the big items done, not only in my prime time, which for me is in the morning always, but also in my prime energy. Because when my energy and focus is stronger, I'm going to do a better job. Really, really powerful. And then I plan based on importance, the benefits that I bring, and the urgency, the time that I have. And then I start to use those 2 words, importance and urgency, as a parameter and a way of reprioritizing my work, rather than having to think I have to do everything. Because actually, if I focus on the things that move the dial the most, that can make a real difference. So reprioritizing based on importance and urgency, just raising our awareness around that, completely recognizing there are things that are time critical. But if we spend all of our time in the top left quadrant of the Eisenhower matrix, the Covey grid, there's a danger that actually we won't do the things that are really important, that really move the dial, that aren't as time pressing. And also there's quite often times when we spend a lot of time doing things that are less important, but seem time pressing, the easier jobs. Now, to bring this to life, I did a piece of work recently with a system just a little way north of London. I won't name the system. That would be right. I was working with a group of 40 junior and middle managers. So in NHS terms, they were band 7 to a band 8B. And we started looking at the prioritization of importance and urgent work. And I asked them how many of them in their career had come across the grid where we got important and urgent, or were aware of the difference of the terms important and urgency and their prioritization approach. And 2 people had heard of the grid. 2 people had used that concept. And those are people who, in essence, it's really interesting to see that that's what had happened. So I guess what that tells us is quite often we're not investing in our managers that can make a real that can actually make a real difference using tools that when they work together can really stick. I'm just seeing a couple of comments. Thanks, Andy, for the prompt. Michelle says outputs are easy to see, but creating a culture of being busy equating to being productive. Absolutely. That's really, really common. And actually, that's why starting with the outcome in mind and going, actually, what are we here to achieve? And then what are the tasks that we do so that they're anchored in my purpose can make a real difference. And quite often that can sift out some of the work that may not actually be necessary or contributing to outcomes. And Funby says, great to be here listening to thought leads on leadership and change. Thank you. The public sector is constantly changing. There's a great quote from Justin Trudeau, and he says, things have never been as busy as they are now, and they'll never be as quiet again. I paraphrase slightly, but that's the reality of where we are. So actually having these practical tools and techniques can really make a difference. And the beauty of leadership and management using practical tools is it's within our gift.
Absolutely.
So we start to bring to life some of our habits. I'm just going to show these 2 slides, and I'll pause and see if Andy or Matthew or Anthony wanted to come in before I go on to the next bit. A number of you will have seen this before again and again, but actually, to what degree is our time and energy within our circle of control? Quite often, and that's certainly been my experience in the public sector, we spend a lot of time worrying about things that are beyond even our influence. And again, what we're looking to do here is great. Make that circle of control bigger. We make no apology. This has been used many times, but the way in which we do this is not an abstract and going, oh, that's an interesting tool. We then break with the team and get them to write down what they do, what's their jobs, and what are their purposes. And then they reprioritize their work using the Eisenhower matrix, and also go, okay, what amount of what I'm worrying about in my headspace is within my gift, and help them to reframe the work that they do, the why that they do it, and also help them come out of, quite often, a survivalist mindset of, if I do more and I work longer hours, I will succeed and I will feel better, which we know can be a bit of a fool's errand. So before I move into the next bit, I'll just pop this back up again here. Deborah's quote. Because the first section is all very much around outcomes. So when we do the first couple of modules, they focus on outcomes, my purpose, why I'm here, my presence, my energy, how I manage my time, how I manage myself. And we introduce lots of other tools such as Pomodoro, time management, and a whole range of other stuff we haven't got time to go into today. But the reality is here, simple tools can make a really, really powerful difference to these to our managers. I'll pause there before I go into the next bit, see if any of my colleagues had any questions or any thoughts.
I could go on forever on the data point, so I won't go into it too much now because I suspect we'll pick it up all together after the slides. But I am itching to get into that. I'm not even going to start because I'll go down a hole.
Well, the next bit's on data, Anthony, so good news.
Contain yourself, Anthony. Yeah, I think never apologise for taking a sort of fairly ground up approach, because I think my experience has been there's often these things that just get passed over when people move into leadership and management roles, and there's often promotion because people are good at doing something, but they're never then given the tools to help other people be better. And I think that the work that you do is about creating that toolkit, so as a manager or leader you've got something to go to, and I think that's great. And we notice it with some of the work that we do on the organisational side around sort of like those dysfunctions that 75% of teams have that are just tolerable. So I think Michelle's just added there, it's commonplace in the private sector too. It's pretty universal. Yes. Guess what? We're all humans, so we all have the same foibles. So there's things that can be done practically to help with that. And some of it is having those basic tools to just say, this is what we need to do. And then at the other side, how do we structure organisations and work environments to maximise and liberate talent?
So this is starting to create the foundational tools and kit that work for people both in their professional lives, but they also work in their personal lives. But it also gives a great foundation to the 5x5 work that Matthew has developed over the years, which is, for me, it's the inverse of the Lencioni 5 dysfunctions of team. Because actually when they have the tools and techniques to manage and lead effectively, it puts them in more of a match fit state of readiness to be able to absorb and work in those challenges, particularly around creating a trusting culture and so forth. But that's way more Matthew's area than mine.
Yeah, and I suppose thank you very much. But I suppose for me, what we're talking about, Michelle's comment about a culture of just being busy, this is a concern, isn't it? That we just do the work, we do the outputs, and that's what we see. We're busy, we reach our target, or we improve our data, and that means something. But it's the lack of meaning. And I think what you're talking about here is how to make time management, how to think about being focused on something that's meaningful, that's aligned to the purpose. And that can get lost very easily. And I think if we're talking about how do we start to achieve that, here are the tools that do that, you start to create that culture that is aligned to a purpose. And exactly. That I think is really an important point.
And just to build on that, Matthew, the thing that really bit me when I started working in the public sector, and I did a piece of work down in Leicestershire back in 2012-13 and was completely bitten by the bug, was I was surrounded by amazing clinical people, administrative staff, band 3, 4, 5s, who had a purpose. And actually, it was such a privilege to be able to work in that environment to support them, to help them achieve their purpose even more. And that's why I've stuck in the sector for, 13 years now. Time flies. Brilliant. Let's move on to.
Can I just wrap that together for me? And
please,
it'll be a link to my data comments later on. I think your analogy with the holes and the tree is genius. I think it's truly genius. And I think it's a heuristic that's really easy for us to hang our hats on and to remember. And almost every one of these themes we'll be able to tie back to that analogy.
Yeah, completely. And that's really helpful, actually. Thank you for saying that, because something I should have mentioned and neglected to in my intro was all of these elements work together, but they're all anchored in my why. They're all anchored in my purpose and my outcomes. And if I'm there and that's anchored in there, and it's anchored in those, everything else that I do are vehicles to achieve that. That's all they are. So it starts to give purposefulness. And we know that this has a material bearing on discretionary effort. It has a material benefit on fulfillment. Good old Maslow on the top of his pyramid. We all like a triangle on this call. It has a bearing on sickness, mental well-being, everything. What's not to like? And the good news is, Covey circles, it's within our gift. So to whet Anthony's appetite then a little more, let's look at data. So we'll pick this bit because I do like a bit of data, because quite often we see it's not used. Now, I've deliberately picked an example from a piece of work or rather a role I held within financial services. It's a good number of years ago now. It was when I was in a senior management role, not doing consultancy or change work, and it really struck me. But it was precursed by a comment by a previous client who said, "You know what the problem is, Alex?" And I love this quote. He said, "We've got an excess of data. We've got a vacuum of insight. I've got it coming out my ears, but I don't really know what's going on. What's it telling me? What is it telling me about the outcomes that I am seeking to achieve? What is it telling me about to what degree I am delivering against the purpose for which we exist?" And that applies to public sector, private sector, charitable sector, everything. Doesn't matter. The power of data. Gosh, yes. I may have a small whinge at the NHS and ICBs a little bit here. I think one of the steps we've taken as a retrograde step is losing some of our high quality business intelligence work and real amazing capacity there to take data and turn it into something that is sorted, arranged and presented visually. But way more importantly than that, because all that is a pile of Lego turned into a story. Because actually the story is the thing that bridges the data and the value that data can bring. And we think for our leaders and managers, understanding and using data effectively, rather than seeing it as just a thing to report, or I've got to do a report at the end of the month, actually helps them not only understand their purpose and how they're doing, but also helps them drive change. So here's an example. I took over as a senior manager in a financial services company, a life assurance business. And I was presented with a report that said, everything's green. It's all brilliant. At the same time, I was presented with another request to increase our staffing in our call center because we were getting a lot of people calling in. And I said, so why were they calling? Why do we need more staff? And we said, because we're getting more calls. And I said, well, I worked that one out. Why are they calling? Well, we worked this one out quite quickly. So let me talk you through what was happening with our teams. And we were across 3 floors here, so we had lots of different teams. Team 1 was the input team. Great news. They were doing their input in 4.5 days with a service level agreement of 5 days. It's green. It's good. Next one, process, keying in. Don't ask me what the difference between 1 and 2 is. I did ask the question. There is a difference between 1 and 2, but they're also doing their bit in 4.5 days. Great news. We then have quality assure to make sure that what team 2 did was what team 1 should have done. So we're checking their quality assurance. So we get correctly keyed in proposals for people who are applying for life assurance. Then we go to the underwriters. Now, in life assurance world, the underwriters are kings. They are gods. They are important people. They make decisions about risk and money and all those clever things. But because they're clever people, they don't have time to do all the admin. So underwriting admin does the admin. And then we have a team to make sure that the underwriting admin people did what the underwriters said they were going to do. But each of those is within SLA, so we're all good. All green, no problem at all. And then we do what we called customer contact, which is transacting the customer. But anyway, that's one for another day. And that was done within 5 days as well. 4.5 days. We're ahead of the game. And then we post it within 5 days. So we're all green. And that was replicated across 4 national teams across England. All good. All good. So I said, Alex was listening to this with interest and had his pen firmly closed to sign off the requisition for more call center staff at this point. And we then said, okay, let's flip this around. Let's understand it from a customer's lens. I'm a customer and I'm applying for life assurance. I post it. What do I do then? That's my entire experience. It's nothing to do with the silage which you show me. I am waiting for 2 days for it to arrive, an enormous amount of days for that to happen, and then 2 more days, and then Royal Mail gets it and pop it through your letterbox. So I've waited 40 days or 5 weeks and 5 days. With nout. Well, I got communicated to towards the end of the process, as you can see. Now, as a customer, and I've done this, I'm going to do one or two things. I'm going to despair and walk away, or I might do some of that and start shouting and go, and call into the call center. And suddenly we go, oh, now I know why we're getting a lot more calls, and the calls are longer, because the first minute and a half is the customer going, what have you done with my application? Michelle, you're exactly right. The process is designed to be complete in 40 days. Absolutely right. So we then said, okay, I asked the question, what is our purpose? Never has a 4-word question taken on us on so many twists and turns, but we went back to what is our purpose? What is our tree? And they were a brilliant team, but we'd lost that. Our purpose is to key in a prop. Our purpose is to dig a hole. Our purpose is to do the underwriting. Our purpose is to fill the hole in. Our purpose is to post a letter. Our purpose is to plant a tree. No, it's not. Our purpose is that if a customer dies, our purpose is to protect and support our customers' families as early as we can. So that was our first go. And we could see people going, oh, I'm not just here to do admin. I'm here that if a customer dies, we can support their families. So we iterated that again. We said, okay, so what's the one measure? We've got 76 measures. No, we haven't. You can't have 76 KPIs because the clue's in the word key. They're not all key. Otherwise, you're like a jailer with a lot of keys. So what's our key outcome, benefit measure? Not output, outcome. And then we'll do other output measures to make sure we count things and so forth. But what's our outcome measure? And we said, how's about this? It's the time from receiving the form to the customer being on risk. Sounds good, except we don't really know what on risk means because it's a bit jargony. But we were moving in the right direction. And to quote another client of ours, it's progress, not perfection. And then we were like, okay, here's our final turn of the wheel, and see what you think of this one as a purpose. It's the time for me from knowing that, from posting my form to knowing that my family are protected if I die. So it's actually not, it is the protection factor, but it's me knowing and being assured and reassured, so assured practically and emotionally reassured that if I die, my family will stay in their own home and will be well looked after. Yes, Michelle, indeed. It did take a long time. We looked at that one as well. We didn't stop here. But we were anchored then in one purpose, one North Star metric, to quote Carl Marsh, one of Andy's colleagues. It's the time from posting my form. All I care about is that I know that I'm protected, that my family are protected if I die. Because everything else otherwise was a watermelon. So actually, we started looking at the purpose and the outcomes. We started looking at why we were there. And from there, we redesigned the end-to-end process, and we got people working much more together. Why? Because they had a shared purpose. And we took the 45-day length of time down to less than 10. And I'll give you 3 guesses, or possibly even 1. What's happened to the number of calls into the call center? Because we anchored everything in the purpose. So a little bit on practical and inspirational leadership, just to give you a flavor, not only of the content that we use, but really also the practical approach we take. So each one of these tools and techniques, when we use it, we work with the teams in the room and say, okay, what's the reality of your job? What are you doing? What's your purpose? And then we use these tools with them so that they go out of that session with the ability to use and implement those tools immediately. And it's the difference really from going, oh, that was an interesting session, to I understand and I will use these tools from today. And in order for that to happen, they have to be very, very simple. So what we're doing in essence is this. We're equipping the leaders and managers with a simple set of tools over a set of modules over a series of months to lead and manage. Why? Because it moves the 76 more towards green. And it creates a much more fun role for them. You get discretionary effort and your whole organization start to lift. And our clients tell us this. Andy mentioned this earlier on. We don't develop and emphasize the tools needed to lead and manage brilliantly. We do lots of other stuff. We put so much effort into, for example, health and safety training or display screen equipment training. I'm not saying they're not important, but to what degree are we training and leading our leaders in how to lead brilliantly? Are we putting more effort into more of the outputs than the stuff that really moves the dial? And quite often also, it's quite often the people who are most technically proficient who are promoted into leadership management roles. To use Matthew's phrase, the 66% of accidental managers. And even if we do support them at the outset, we don't continue with the development in a structured way. So once we've introduced these tools with the teams and they have a go, by using action learning sets over the following months, they start to groove in and use the new habits. And they go, and I keep using it. Why? Because they work. So it starts to become self-fulfilling because they have a go with the tool and the grid and they go, I can't believe it. We did that on the course and it worked. And the response would be, yes, that's why we did it, because it does indeed work. And yet, developing and nurturing highly effective leaders and managers is proven to generate success. However you measure success, however your tree is. And yet, to what degree do we do the simple things brilliantly and consistently and in a standardized way that move the dial? And that's why our approach has been developed. And every time we work with an organization, the same themes appear. It's around these core concepts of purpose and outcomes, and then the tools that support those to be delivered. And as we mentioned earlier on, this is where it links to brilliantly for us to the 5x5 model, and creating the intentional culture, creating a sense of trust, psychological safety, team alignment within a defined structure that enables you to define goals, set goals, and of course, another word for a goal, an outcome. So the benefits of implementing all these 5 essential team functions cannot be overstated. And we just think when Andy and Matthew and I worked together, and Andy kindly introduced me to Matthew, it just felt like such a symbiotic relationship that actually the core foundations of leadership and management and skills that we have is a great precursor to, enabler to, fitting alongside of the 5x5 model. And at that point, I'm going to pause for breath. That's us. That's Tracy, is our clinical director. Julie's our brilliant social work colleague and is director of assurance, keeps us all on the rails. And my role is running programs of change. That's us at C24. And I'll stop there and say thank you and ask if there's any further questions, thoughts,
Brilliant.
and most importantly, reflections. Thank you.
Brilliant. Can I start by asking you a tricky one, Alex? Just
go for it. You can ask the question. I'll do my very best to answer it.
Okay, so in my experience, we are absolutely, in terms of those KPIs, trying to capture a lot of data and not necessarily focus on the really important things, i.e. the outcomes, the trees. In your experience, that's a cultural thing. That's an identity that's built up over decades of managers succeeding and going up the levels of hierarchy because they're good at setting the KPIs and because they're good at demanding that KPIs get hit, etc., etc. And on paper, great success has been achieved. Back to your first analogy, we're at 66%. We've done 100% improvement. So that becomes your identity in a way as a manager. And I felt that through my early career, training as a management accountant. Data, KPIs, command and control silos is the most efficient way to manage things. You become an expert in your area and your productivity is massively better because you're focused and you specialize. And I think I can feel it. We didn't go into that much detail today, but the failure demand is in the gaps between the functions.
It certainly is.
That's where all the failure demand and the dark matter that Chris Cooper would call it is, the waste is, massive amounts of waste. That's the 40 days, most of that 40 days. Chris Cooper does a brilliant explanation around, it's a bit like being on a theme park, it being in the NHS. You'll have a tiny bit of value add with let's say a GP, and then you'll wait for a long time before you get the next ride in the fun fair. And then you'll wait a long time before you're in the next ride on the fun fair. And we never really think about the gaps and the failure demand and all that waste in the middle because we're not looking at it from the point of the tree or the patient in this scenario.
Can I jump in there? Because the thing I was going to make, that it's a really great analogy there, Anthony, because if we look at that life assurance example and we look at the time from when somebody is deemed as ready for discharge to them living independently at home, to what degree do we measure that end to end? And to what degree do we measure the number of days I'm in hospital, number of days I'm in intermediate care, the number of time I'm waiting for patient transport, reablement, etc. And I think that's a perfect analogy for sometimes where the NHS measures outputs rather than the thing that really matters and matters clinically, which is supporting them to remain and live well independently at home as early as possible, because that has a massive bearing on their longer term outcomes.
Absolutely, which is taking me back to the difficult question, if you like. It's how do we change the identity of those leaders that demand the hundreds of KPIs, the massive data and no insights?
It's a great question.
To get them to go, okay, because my big thing is eureka moments. And you'll only get change and behavioral change when you do generate that. Oh my God, I can see it. I can see what we're doing wrong.
It's a great
question. Then your identity changes, and then you can get people to go, okay, we're just going to focus on measurement of the trees. and we're going to have a lot more trust to the workforce that as a valued asset, as opposed to somebody we need to control and use data as a punishment and we're watching you, we don't trust you,
Yes.
into no, we trust you. We'll focus on the trees. You can tell us about all the progress and all the improvements you're making every week, every month, because you'll be able to make them if we allow you to.
I have a perfect example for that, and this will make Andy blush because this is exactly what happened with our frailty program. So Andy and I worked for Andy when I was over in Holton doing some work there, and Andy was also chief exec of Warrington at CCG. And Andy and I had a conversation because we recognised that within the Warrington system, those living with frailty had some of the worst outcomes in the country for a broadly averagely frail population. That was the headline metric. So Andy and I remember this vividly. We sat down, had a conversation, and we talked about running a frailty program. And I said, Andy, are you trying to build a new frailty service, or are you trying to make a difference to outcomes for those living with frailty? And what's the key difference we want to make? And Andy, because he's a visionary leader, and I say that with without making him blush, because he is, said it's the latter. We said we don't know all the boxes that we're going to do and all the work that we're going to do yet, but we want to start with what's the tree. And we did work with the team, and this was quite a lot of work to do with the team to bring them along this journey with us. And we said, actually, if we're going to measure one thing, which is the equivalent of the life assurance example of, I want to know that my family are protected, we said, out of 365 days, how many days at home do we want people living with frailty, for which we use the proxy of age, to be living at home? So it was a percentage of 365, which is the inverse of being in hospital or being in a different environment. And we calculated it by taking all the days they were not at home and doing 1 minus. But the purpose of it was to energize people around. We want to see that go up. And you know what it did? Yes, we have a big old COVID blip in the middle of it, where everybody lived at home because we kicked them all out of the hospitals. But so we took that out, and that's a whole nother session on special cause variation on the data set, which I won't go into today. But the reality is we focused because we had a very strong leader and a decision maker who could say, this is the essence of what we're here to do. And we then built a program with the team around that, but everything was anchored into it. So from my point of view, when we work with clients, we have to have somebody who's got the mandate to make the difference, who has got the vision to make the difference, and who is actually willing to go, I'm not going to be obsessive about to what degree day in, day out is the dial moving, but I'm going to look at a trend over time.
Brilliant. Sorry, guys, I'll let you in a minute, but it feels like it's really relevant just to challenge that a little bit. How do you, because everybody's overwhelmed, again, back to a theme, to the point where we can't think because we're just firefighting every day. How do you get to the point where they'll go, okay, we need that tree. That's the focus. That's the focus on the reporting, etc., and everything we do. Okay, I'm happy to release and not do those other 350 KPIs that we're currently doing and we've done for the last 15 years.
Yeah, I'll answer that because I don't think it's about one or the other. I think it's about saying, okay, what is our purpose? What is our tree? And then if you get that, you can go, okay, to what degree, which I love this question, to what degree do the measures that we're measuring contribute to that tree? Because then you can start to prioritize a list of 300 and you start to refine them. To use a cooking analogy, you start to bubble down your gravy into a really fine jus that's really shiny and glossy, and you start to pick up the key metrics. But I am a realist. Of course, we have our regulators. Of course, we have other things where we have to measure outputs. It's not that measuring outputs is the wrong. It's that sometimes if we don't recognize to what degree they're connected to the outcome, the output measures, which are sometimes called erroneously, in my view, key performance indicators. They're not, they're output indicators, which is different. The danger is that they become the end in their own right. The digging the hole is not the KPI. The planting of the tree and actually the creation of fresh air is the outcome, is the benefit. So that's why we did that.
Yeah, really brilliant. I'll hand over to Andrew next.
Can I have a crack at Michelle's question? I think they've got a good compound question there, Michelle. And thank you, Alex, for the frailty stuff. That was good fun work, that. And
it was brilliant.
Good benefit that came out of it, did. And it motivated people as well. So what techniques did you use? Why are we here? And what's the actual purpose of an organisation? I like to feel people are everywhere, but where they should. How did you know when you got there? Okay, so I would say I'll answer it in reverse order. So a really good goal should be something that you can never really achieve. because it might be aiming for perfection, and you have to accept that that isn't possible. However, what you can do is break that down into your outcomes. The outcomes are the more tangible, measurable things. So for our goal for frailty, we didn't want anybody to be in hospital. So our goal will be, well, nobody should need to go to hospital or anything. We should be able to support them at home. We know that that's completely unachievable, because there will always be days when anybody goes to hospital. So for reasons, people will end up in hospital, and therefore we came up with a measure that we could calculate, was hard data that we could attach to the outcome, that the better we made that, the closer we were to our goal. And I always think that a good goal has an emotional resonance to it, because it should motivate people through emotion, not just facts. Whereas outcomes, you can measure the facts. If they're attached to an emotional resonance, that's what gets you your purpose and motivation to improve it. So I think by answering backwards, when you get to that bit of why you're here, what gets you up in the morning and why do you turn up? And that has to be a group conversation, and challenging to say, okay, well, is that as good as it is? Because people will start at different ends of that question. Some people will start, at the moon, other people will start at the launch pad. So how do you get the connection between the two so that you end up with an agreed shared purpose? And I think Alex demonstrated it on his finance, his time with the finance company, with the life insurance company, that it took a couple of goes to get there. And it's that magic of, you keep that conversation going, and if it's not hitting everybody emotionally, it's not finished. So have another round. And when everybody goes, that's it, and it connects, it resonates, you've got your purpose, and then you find the right words for it that don't usually include the measures. Because actually, if you think about hip replacement, the outcome is pain-free walking.
And independence.
So we measure a lot of things to get there, but actually what we want is pain-free walking. So there's lots of things that you can do like that, which just translate it into the story. So the house in Alex's Lego diagram.
Can I add a couple of just bits to build on what Andy said there? The richness is in the iteration, and actually there's a lot of research about having the time to have unstructured discussion between teams, just to allow things to percolate through, rather than going, we've got to do meetings to do task. Build in time as leadership groups to just allow things to percolate, or to distill down, whichever refining analogy you want to use. There's also something which Andy said, which really resonates for me, and which we cover on the program, which is about target setting. Because too often targets are set as a pass-fail. Why? Why don't we do, what's the minimum we would expect? What's satisfactory level? And then what would be really outstanding? So none of those are pass-fail. Those are all progress towards a goal. And when you start to reframe it in that way, I mean, the great example of this is weight loss. If I go, I've got to lose 2 stone in a week, I'm going to be set up to fail. But if I go, actually, what's my minimum that I would be comfortable with? Satisfactory and outstanding. I'm setting myself up towards a growth mindset concept of improvement, rather than achieving pass fail. And I think the question, Michelle, is really, really good. And because it's anchored, and back to yours as well, Anthony, it is anchored, unfortunately, in systems that like to have binary results, so they can show we spent X money and we got Y benefit. That is not the reality of the world, and it is absolutely not the reality of the world in health and social care. And in actual fact, and I put my head again above the parapet a little bit here, I think it detracts from the outcomes that we seek by creating that mindset of, if we measure this and we can prove that it washed its face in terms of costs, the danger is sometimes that will not necessarily be doing the thing which will actually deliver the tree.
Absolutely. I'm sure we've got loads more questions, but we'll give Matthew a chance first.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to come back to the idea of culture, if we're going to do any collaborative goal setting and work towards achieving the outcomes, we do have to have that time to think together, don't we? And to iterate on that, to really get to the point, as you were saying, Andy, about everyone has to feel it. There has to be a real connection to it to motivate. And suddenly we're now talking about addressing the 5 dysfunctions of a team because of the lack of commitment or fear of conflict. Well, what if I say I don't agree with that? How can we iterate if we don't have a sense of trust? So relationships and the people we work with and building that and creates the space where we can start to have these conversations in a meaningful way and a purposeful way. And really, for me, that's the fundamental part to this is, as you said, Alex, that unstructured thinking time together. Let's just talk. Let's just see where that takes us. And that really does lead to innovation.
Can I just chip in on that one? It resonates with me really strongly. This is why the why and the purpose is so important. When you get to that point of disagreement, build your precepts around that goal and that purpose. And then you can say, well, I don't agree with that. And you can reference your goal, your purpose, and your precepts. And you go, well, how can you not agree with that? Because that's completely aligned with it. You don't agree because of this. Well, this isn't part of our goal and our precepts. And I think it can really unlock things. Then it's another tool, if you like, to guide us in the right direction and keep us on track. And it can reduce that conflict and anxiety and all those sorts of things.
I think the other thing which I would say, just building on what you said there, Anthony, is within the sector that I now find myself working within health and social care, the opportunities are massive, absolutely huge for the kind of application we're talking about here, because it's not been done consistently and in a structured and systemic way. And that's no slight or no fault to anybody. It's an absolute privilege to work in this sector with clinicians and other colleagues who work and do amazing work. Absolutely a privilege to do it. And it's frustrating because the opportunities to do more of this in a more structured way and release the real potential of those individuals so that they're not spending as much time, to use your fairground analogy, which I completely love, queuing, waiting for the ride or waiting for the post to land. That's waste. That's absolutely waste. It's failure demand. And the reality of the opportunity to help liberate those resources, that's the holy grail. That for us is a big part of the holy grail within the NHS and within social care. If we can unlock that potential by using those real practical tools in a way, it's not just using the tools, it's in a way in the room that they go, this isn't an abstract. This isn't an observation. Yeah. This isn't, I like the tool. This is, I can use this now when I walk out of the room, and I will do. And that's the difference that we think we bring through this work. And it's not radical, but we just think it works. Yeah, absolutely. Can I be rude and ask another one? I'm taking up too much time here. I think that there's layers of those goals as well. So for me, the biggest eureka moment is tying into what Alex has just said. Then is taking yourself out of your hole digging silo, where your focus is, if I dig 50 holes today, my God, I've done a brilliant job. Isn't that amazing? Into actually it's the patient or it's the tree that's the focus. That's the eureka moment. And then you can see the waste in the gaps. And that waste is ginormous, and it causes the whole system to be overwhelmed and stressed, and as well as a poor service to the tree or the patient. So by seeing that first, then it opens the doors, and then you got some of the sub-objectives, which is the frailty piece, or the flow through A&E or whatever it is. But first and foremost, you've got to have that Damocles moment of it's the patient, it's the patient, it's the patient. And then everything else is easier thereafter.
I think as well, the big organisations and statutory bodies tend to work on linear flow of logic. And that's not the way the world works. And one of the bits that we use in quality improvement and as part of our sessions with 5x5 are things like driver diagrams. So looking at, well, what is your purpose? What are all the things that could contribute to that? And how do they all connect to each other? Which ones are your first order, second order, third order? And how do you set reasonable goals around each of those, or outcomes around each of those? And which ones are going to have the biggest impact? So you can start to break down things so that people can have really simple, and you mentioned the word before, heuristics, about planting the tree, heuristics about, if I do these things, I don't need to worry about the outcome anymore. I've already bought into that. I know that, and we've worked back that if I do these things, this will happen. And it's a really powerful way of deconstructing it so that people don't necessarily need to continuously look up to the outcome. They can do, and hopefully there's time to do that, but quite often what happens is people end up engaged in tasks that don't contribute to the outcome and can't look up, so the whip cracks, people work harder and faster, and all that does is it creates a bigger divide between where people are, the effort that they're putting in, and their contribution to outcome. So working in a non-linear logic model way really, really helps when things are pressed, so that people can continue and they know with confidence that they're going to get there. And the other way of expressing it is the 5 whys and 5 hows. So if any individual can say, why am I doing this? And it links back to the outcome, that's great, because they know they're on track. And if any strategist can say, well, how do we get that done, and go down to what somebody's doing individually in the organization, and that links back to strategy and outcome, then you've got alignment. And if you ever try that in most organizations, there's a break somewhere, that things had been done because that's the way they've always been done.
Yeah,
it's interesting. We did a piece of work on, again, in Mornington, on intermediate care at home, which is supporting people as they return from home from hospital. And we sat down with the team, and it was about 60 odd in the room. We said, what's the purpose of intermediate care at home? And we distilled it down to supporting people to live well independently. And then when you crank back from that, and we mapped out their end-to-end process, which was enormous and very, very, very fragmented, we said, okay, so given we've got an outcome that we want to achieve, and given that's your current existing as is current situation, what can we do to make that better, to achieve the outcome? But without the outcome anchor, the danger is all you're trying to do, to use a favorite analogy of mine, is you're trying to make your horse go faster, when the reality is you need a car. There is only so fast you can make your horse go. It's better by refining and simplifying, or sometimes overcomplicating an additional process, or bolting in another team or another step or another initiative or another QOF measure or whatever it happens to be, to rather than simplifying. And a real root cause of everything we do is very much around simplification of process and end-to-end design, anchored in the outcome and its purpose.
Yeah, makes complete sense.
The thing from my perspective, I think if it's about getting buy-in from senior leaders, who may have to hit these metrics, and we have to look at this, it's being able to answer the question, do we really want to make a difference for the patient, or do we just want to put out fires? Because the firefighting is very much about, let's just focus on these outputs and focus on, have we hit them, and are we making that, without actually thinking about how can we truly make a difference. So that's an important question, I think, to get that initial focus on what's important, what's the purpose, what's the meaningful aspects of that. I just wanted to add that, Paul.
Yeah, it's all connected, isn't it? Fantastic. So we're getting close to the hour. If there's any other questions from the LinkedIn guys, then please send them through now. Otherwise, Alex, I don't know if you want to give us a summary of what you think we've discussed and summarize it all for us.
Oh gosh, there's a challenge. Brevity is not my strength, as my colleagues will know very well. I think the thing I would say is I guess the thing for us, the takeaway point is, don't be afraid to do the simple things brilliantly and sustainably, because actually it's the simple things that move the dial. And in more years than I care to remember in this career I've been fortunate enough to have, it's the simple things that work again and again and again and again and again and again. And actually, the question I would ask is, to what degree are we putting the simple tools and techniques in place with our leaders and managers to assure ourselves, not reassure, assure factually, that we are making the very best use of those assets to get the best out of the 76%, and also to fulfill the reason they work in, particularly the health and social care sector, which is to do an amazing job for patients. And that's why I work in this sector. That's why we founded Consortium 24. Do the simple things amazingly, brilliantly, and never be afraid for it. I've seen too many times in both private and public sectors, we look for a complex solution. Shouldn't be. The vast majority of the things that we do that move the dial are simple. And that would be my final point.
Brilliant. Sounds like a really, really good summary. Andrew, do you want to do a quick summary?
It can have a go. Just those simple things are really important, and they open the door to understanding how organizations, cultures, climates, structures can all support or get in the way of people doing those things. And that's kind of why we look at things almost not from an opposite end of the problem, because they're very, very interrelated. And that's why we sort of I thought of Alex immediately, because of some of the questions we had last time around and what would you do about that? Because it's the so what stuff that's really important, and I think Alex has discussed that in spades. And then if we can get the other bits right as well as a wrapper, perfect.
Brilliant. Matthew?
What more is there to say? I think, all of these ideas are really important. We're talking about improving services. We're talking about improving how we work together, what we're working for, and how often is it that we look at how we're working with a lens of quality improvement on that, and really, what we're talking about today, what Alex has brought in is a way of ensuring that we are delivering quality outcomes for the people that matter.
Fantastic. I would just summarize by saying, thank you, Alex. Brilliant presentation. You've enabled us to cover a massive amount of ground. I don't know whether people realize how much depth is actually behind all that, but we've covered a massive amount of ground. I'm 100% with you on the flow. Your focus on flow, for me, is right up my street, exactly what I focus on as well. And one extra thing just to add for as a closing point, which hopefully will be a great insight for people, is in addition to thinking about the flow, also think about the order of the flow and what order you do things in. Because often if you start at the beginning of a flow and you make massive improvements there, if you're not careful, you just create all sorts of other problems further downstream, and then it's like whack-a-mole. You've created one problem, one solution has just generated another 5 problems. So really think about the order of your innovations and your transformations would be my last parting point.
Just a little point on that. If you look, let's take hospital discharge as a great example there. If you think, well, actually, for the hospital discharge design bit, I'm just going to work with the hospital, you missed the point. So
Absolutely.
let's have domiciliary care workers in there and carers and patients, people with lived experience themselves, and everybody who's involved in the journey end to end on the bus at the start to do exactly what you just said, Anthony. Because they'll go, well, if you do that there, then it's going to make a problem there. So do it all together, and that's where that unstructured discussion, the richness comes through. So the way in which we go about doing that has everybody on the bus. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to catch up with you after, Alex, in terms of where Insight Genie can help with that data collection, insight collection. But I love that session. That's why I love doing these Fridays, because you learn so much from different people and their different experiences. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciated it. We've had some good thank yous in the chat as well. So thanks for people that made it live, and hopefully the people that watch it on recordings over the weekend will enjoy it as well. Thanks ever so much, guys. I'm sure we'll do another one of these in the future as well.
Perfect.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great session. Thanks. Stay well.